The hangar smelled of hot metal and ozone, a faint hum of charging energy cores vibrating underfoot. Flickering lights traced the edges of the enormous spacecraft, casting long, jittering shadows across the polished floors. He had been working late, hands covered in smudges of synthetic oil, running diagnostics on the newest fighter prototype. The solitude was rare. Usually the hum of the crew and the distant clatter of maintenance bots kept the late hours from feeling oppressive. Tonight, though, there was only him, the stars outside the enormous viewports, and a growing sense of boredom that always tempted him into mischief. He glanced at the small communication console embedded in the wall of the cockpit alcove. The interface pulsed softly, indicating the idle presence of the one person he never expected to reach out to casually: his boss. She was known across 3-star systems not only for her skill in piloting and strategy, but also for her icy demeanor, a perfectionist who had never smiled openly at anyone, except perhaps her own kind. Yet tonight, for reasons he couldn't entirely justify, he allowed a smirk to creep across his face as he tapped a message. Careful, or I might start thinking you're enjoying your work here. Dangerously so. He laughed quietly at his own nerve, fingers hovering over the console as he imagined her icy stare, her long ears flicking in silent irritation. The absurdity of it made him chuckle, but he hit send anyway, as impulsive as ever. He returned to tightening a calibration panel, trying to focus on the task, but his mind kept wandering to what her reaction might be. He knew the odds were slim for anything but a cold rebuke, or worse, silence. But there was something thrilling about even the chance that she might find it amusing. 6 minutes later, the hangar doors rumbled. He looked up, half expecting some kind of routine inspection drone, only to find her standing there, tall and composed, the dim light catching the pale silver of her uniform and the sharp glint of her long ears. She crossed the hangar with a slow, purposeful stride, her presence radiating authority so effortlessly that even the humming engines and charging cores seemed to quiet in deference. He froze, a mixture of fear, admiration, and an involuntary thrill running through him. Well, she said, her voice smooth and calm, but carrying a weight that made it impossible to ignore. I received your message. He swallowed hard, trying to summon a coherent response. But the first thing that slipped out was, I meant it as a joke? His attempt at casual humor landed awkwardly in the tension-filled space between them, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then, unexpectedly, a subtle twitch of her long ears suggested something more than irritation, perhaps curiosity or even amusement. The alien boss tilted her head, scanning him as though she were analyzing the structural integrity of a ship rather than a human being standing nervously in front of her. A joke, she repeated slowly, her tone neutral yet loaded with meaning. I see. And you expect me to find this entertaining? Well, he stammered, rubbing the back of his neck, I wasn't entirely expecting a visit, so it's already exciting enough on its own? The words were clumsy and he cursed internally, but she merely raised an eyebrow, a slight quirk at the edge of her lips, hinting at restrained amusement. Her eyes, sharp and reflective, followed him as he moved to finish tightening a panel, each click of the tools punctuating the silence. You have spirit, she finally said, voice softer now, but with a tone that carried both judgment and intrigue. And reckless timing. I approve. Cautiously. He blinked. Approval? From her? He didn't dare smile fully, afraid it would seem like gloating. Cautious approval, he repeated, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Better than a formal scolding, I guess. The alien boss's ears flicked again, a subtle movement that made him wonder if she was amused, or calculating how best to punish him for his audacity. You are fortunate the hangar is isolated, she said, her gaze sweeping the space as though ensuring no one else could witness this. Otherwise, the consequences would be less forgiving. He nodded vigorously, letting a nervous laugh escape. Right, isolated. Lucky me. He wiped his hands on a rag, trying to appear busy and competent, though his pulse raced like the engines behind him. There was a delicate balance in the air. Electric tension mingled with something more unpredictable, a sense that this encounter was the beginning of something neither of them fully understood yet. She stepped closer, observing the fighter's hull, but her attention never wavered from him. Curiosity can be dangerous, she said softly, almost conversationally, but it can also lead to interesting discoveries. He swallowed again, trying to match the calmness in her voice, though he doubted he succeeded. Interesting discoveries, he echoed. Yeah, I can handle that. His attempt at confidence drew a faint, almost imperceptible smile from her, a tiny crack in the wall of ice that surrounded her demeanor. As the hum of the hangar continued and the stars twinkled outside the viewport, he realized something profound, yet exhilarating. For the first time, he wasn't just working for an untouchable superior. He was part of a dynamic that could be dangerous, challenging, and, against all odds, strangely thrilling. The adventure had begun, and neither of them knew how far it would go. Their eyes met again, lingering with unspoken acknowledgement, a mixture of challenge, curiosity, and something electric that neither wanted to define just yet. He picked up his tools again, pretending to work, while she watched, the tension shifting subtly into the beginnings of trust, and perhaps the faintest hint of something more. The next morning, the hangar felt different. The sunlight streaked through the translucent panels above, scattering prismatic glints across the polished floors. And for some reason, it seemed smaller, more intimate, almost as if the previous night had reshaped it in his mind. He walked past the fighter he'd been repairing, hands tucked into the pockets of his uniform jacket, trying to act as if he hadn't spent half the night replaying every detail of the alien boss's visit. The engines hummed softly, a background chorus to his spiraling thoughts. She arrived shortly after the first maintenance bots began their rounds, moving with that familiar, precise grace that always made him feel simultaneously dwarfed and exhilarated. Her presence carried a weight no human could ignore, commanding, unyielding, yet strangely magnetic. Today, however, there was a subtle change in her expression, a softness around the eyes that suggested the memory of last night lingered longer than it should have. "You're early," he said, trying to mask the nervous excitement with a casual tone. His fingers tapped the edge of the workstation as if testing its durability, but in reality he was testing his own ability to maintain composure. Her long ears twitched at his voice, an almost imperceptible movement, and she tilted her head ever so slightly. "I am never late," she said, a smirk threatening to appear, though she reined it back with disciplined effort. "You, however, appear restless." He laughed awkwardly, scratching the back of his neck. "I might be, or maybe I just enjoy watching maintenance bots fail spectacularly before I fix them." He gestured toward a small drone that had just tripped over a stray cable, spinning in a flurry of sparks and circuitry. She raised an eyebrow but said nothing, allowing him the small triumph of the joke. "Humor in precarious circumstances," she observed, stepping closer to inspect the fighter's wingtip. Her long fingers brushed lightly over the alloy, and he noticed the meticulous care in every movement, as though she could sense the weaknesses in the ship's design by mere touch. "A human trait, often ill-advised in my presence, but amusing." He swallowed and leaned against the console. "Ill-advised, huh? I'll file that under the category of advice I'll ignore. For now." His attempt at cheek drew the smallest of smirks from her, and he felt his pulse quicken. That tiny shift, almost imperceptible, was more disarming than any warning she could have issued. For a while they worked side by side, each absorbed in their own tasks, yet subtly aware of the other's presence. He handed her tools when she asked, trying to mask the nervous excitement that came with every touch, every glance. She in turn observed his methods with a quiet intensity, offering the occasional critique that was sharper than any human superior had ever dared. "Your torque application is inconsistent. Adjust here." "Yes, ma'am," he replied, the words clipped but polite, though inside he was grinning. Her attention, even in critique, felt like a compliment. He caught himself imagining what it would be like if the hum of the hangar faded entirely, and it was just the two of them and the intricate dance of metal and energy cores. As the hours passed, she paused occasionally to lean closer over a control panel, her hair brushing against his shoulder. Each accidental contact sent a jolt of awareness through him, a mixture of fear, excitement, and fascination. "Do humans often fumble so endearingly?" she asked once, her tone teasing but controlled. I'll take that as a compliment, he said quickly, smiling despite himself. Endearingly fumble, got it. A sudden warning siren cut through the hangar's steady hum. He and she both froze, eyes snapping to the source. A small energy core on one of the peripheral ships was fluctuating dangerously, sparks jumping from its containment field. Without hesitation, she stepped forward, her movements fluid and precise, guiding his hands to stabilize the field. The two of them moved in perfect synchrony, her instructions concise, his reflexes adapting to her rhythm. When the core finally stabilized with a satisfying hum, he exhaled, leaning back. That was, terrifyingly efficient, he admitted, unable to hide the mixture of relief and admiration in his voice. She studied him, long ears angled slightly forward in a gesture he couldn't fully read. Efficiency is survival, she said simply. Then after a pause, she added, but you performed beyond expectation. Human, you are unpredictable. He laughed nervously, shrugging. I'll take unpredictable as a compliment, too. Seems like my skill set is more versatile than I thought. Her eyes met his, a subtle gleam of curiosity and something softer, lingering in the silver depths. Perhaps, she murmured, and perhaps there is more to learn from you than I anticipated. The rest of the morning passed in a dance of tools, energy cores, and cautious banter. Each exchange carried a subtle weight, a growing understanding that neither had fully acknowledged. By the time the sun outside had reached its zenith, he realized something extraordinary. This alien boss, distant and formidable, was no longer a figure of intimidation alone. She was a presence that challenged him, intrigued him, and, despite every rational thought, pulled him into a space that was uniquely theirs. As she finally straightened, stepping back to admire the repaired wing of the fighter, he allowed himself a small, private smile. The hangar felt alive in a way it hadn't before, a place where danger, curiosity, and subtle attraction wove together seamlessly. And somewhere deep in the core of his being, he understood that their story, unpredictable, thrilling, and utterly impossible, was only just beginning. The hangar was quieter than usual, the hum of active engines replaced by the occasional squeak of maintenance bots rolling along their tracks. He adjusted the visor of his tool helmet, frowning at a faulty graviton welder that refused to calibrate properly. Every attempt to fix it seemed to only make the problem worse, and frustration was beginning to bubble under his calm facade. Just as he was about to toss it aside in exasperation, a familiar shadow crossed the polished floor. She was there, long ears angled forward, her presence somehow both commanding and casual as she leaned against the edge of the workstation. You're struggling, she stated matter-of-factly, eyes narrowing slightly at the sparks sputtering from the welder. Her tone wasn't harsh, but it carried the kind of observation that made him feel completely exposed. I prefer to think of it as aggressively learning, he replied, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. Every mistake is a lesson, right? He offered a grin, hoping she would accept the humor in it. She tilted her head and he caught the tiniest twitch of amusement at the corner of her mouth. Learning through mistakes is human. Interesting, she said, stepping closer. Her fingers brushed lightly against the control panel as she scanned the readouts. Though in my experience, mistakes with graviton welders can be inconvenient. She tapped a sequence on the panel and the device hummed back to life, perfectly calibrated. He blinked, genuinely impressed. How did you... Observation, she interrupted, her voice calm but carrying an underlying edge. You leave a trail of errors like breadcrumbs. Easy to trace. He laughed, leaning back against the console. Well, I'm glad my mistakes aren't wasted then. At least someone benefits from them. Her long hair shifted as she moved closer, the slight swish of it brushing his shoulder. It is entertaining, she admitted, though I must caution you, not all humans are as resilient. Some would break under the same pressure. I like to think I'm above average in resilience, he said, smirking, though apparently not above average in subtlety, considering last night's... He waved vaguely, embarrassed to even say it aloud. Flirting, she supplied softly, almost teasing, but her eyes held a spark of curiosity. Yes, you are bold human, bold and unpredictable. He chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. I'll take bold and unpredictable over cautious and boring any day. Besides, I had no idea my message would cause you to appear 6 minutes later. Timing is critical, she said, her gaze locking onto his. 6 minutes can make the difference between life and, well, an unpleasant outcome. There was a pause, and he noticed a fleeting softness in her expression before she straightened. But you handled it admirably. He felt a surge of pride, though he tried to hide it with a casual shrug. Thanks. I aim to please, at least when it involves surviving unexpected visits from terrifying alien bosses. Her lips twitched in what he could only interpret as the smallest of smiles. Terrifying is a matter of perspective, she murmured. Some humans fear me. You do not. Not entirely. He laughed, shaking his head. I do fear you, just in a different way. He didn't elaborate, knowing the nuance of that fear was a strange mixture of respect, fascination, and admittedly, attraction. They moved through the rest of the morning in a rhythm that felt almost choreographed, alternating between work and subtle verbal sparring. He passed her tools with careful efficiency, watching her fingers manipulate circuits and panels with precision. She offered occasional guidance, which he absorbed eagerly, noting each subtle gesture that revealed both her patience and her exacting standards. Suddenly, the warning lights on the hull monitoring system flared. A microfracture had developed along the wing support of the starfighter he'd been servicing, and if left unchecked, it could compromise the entire frame during the next test flight. His heart raced as he moved toward it, but she was already beside him, calm and deliberate. Apply pressure here, she instructed, guiding his hands over the repair panel. Steady, not too fast. Let the graviton field stabilize the lattice first. Working together, they manipulated the field generators, her long ears brushing against his arm as she leaned closer to ensure precise alignment. Every movement was electric, the combination of danger and proximity creating a tension that wasn't entirely professional. Sparks flew, not from the machine, but from the invisible current of awareness between them. The fracture sealed, the hull stabilized, and he leaned back, breathing heavily. That went better than I expected, he admitted. Better than expected is relative, she said, glancing at him with an unreadable expression. Some would call this impressive. He allowed himself a small, triumphant grin. I'll take impressive. I like it. For a brief moment, they lingered, standing side by side, the hum of the hangar now a comforting backdrop rather than a sterile echo. He could feel her attention on him, measured yet probing, and he realized that this moment, quiet, charged, full of subtle electricity, was becoming more important than the work itself. You are different, she said softly, almost to herself, not like the others. And I like different, he replied, voice low but steady. Keeps things interesting. She studied him for a moment longer, then finally nodded, a silent acknowledgement that the game they had begun, balancing work, tension, in this growing curiosity, was only just beginning. The hangar, once merely a place of metal and machinery, had transformed into a stage for something far more complex. A dance of intellect, instinct, and the unspoken pull of two beings navigating boundaries neither fully understood. And as the sunlight glinted off the polished floors, reflecting in her intense eyes, he knew that unpredictability, boldness, and subtle danger were no longer just elements of the job. They were the foundation of whatever was unfolding between them. The next morning, the hangar felt smaller somehow, or maybe it was just that her presence made everything more immediate. He arrived early expecting to be alone, but she was already there, standing beside the partially disassembled gravjet frame. Her long ears angled slightly forward as she inspected the components, and the way the light caught her amber eyes made him forget entirely that he was supposed to start with diagnostics first. You're early, he said, trying to sound casual while fumbling with the datapad in his hands. Did you sleep, or is this one of those alien efficiency rituals I've heard rumors about? She glanced at him, expression unreadable for a moment, before a small smirk tugged at her lips. I sleep, she said simply, but I also do not waste time when precision is required. The jet will not fix itself, and neither will inefficiencies. He raised an eyebrow. Inefficiencies, huh? Sounds like a personal jab. Should I be offended, or is this part of the mysterious alien boss charm? She allowed herself a slight chuckle, a rare and musical sound that made him grin, despite the rising tension in his chest. Consider it a professional observation, she said, her gaze flicking back to the engine's quantum coils. Although, she added after a pause, your flair for human improvisation is notable. He smirked, adjusting his tool belt. Improvisation is my specialty, kind of my way of keeping things interesting. Besides, you never know when a graviton misalignment might need a human touch. Her eyes softened, and for a moment he thought he saw something almost like admiration, but in her world he knew it could just as easily be scrutiny. A human touch can be unpredictable, yet sometimes effective, she said, her voice dropping just enough that he leaned closer to hear. The morning passed in a mixture of precise adjustments, silent cooperation, and subtle, charged glances. He worked on the plasma injectors while she monitored the gravitational stabilization arrays. At one point, a sparking conduit threatened to short out, and without thinking, he dove to twist it into place. She was instantly beside him, her hand brushing his arm as she steadied his movements. "You're reckless," she observed, but there was no scolding in her voice, just a careful measuring of his reactions. "And you're dangerously close for comfort," he replied, trying to mask the quickening of his heartbeat. "Though I guess that's part of the job now, isn't it?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she guided his hands over delicate circuits with meticulous care, her fingers brushing his more than once. Each contact sent a tingle through him, but he tried to focus on the work, reminding himself that sparks from plasma coils could be fatal, whereas sparks from a touch were merely electrifying. By midday, the gravjet was nearly operational. He wiped his brow, glancing at her with a grin. "Not bad for a day's work, though I'd say the real magic happened in teamwork." Her long ears twitched in amusement. "Teamwork, yes," she said, stepping back to observe his handiwork. "Though some would call it fortunate timing and human daring." He laughed, shaking his head. "Fortunate timing and daring? Sounds like the title of my autobiography." He noticed her brow quirk upward at the remark, and he felt the small victory of making her slightly amused, a rare achievement. As they moved toward the cockpit to run preliminary systems checks, he noticed how the light played across her armor plating, subtle engravings catching the metallic sheen. "You know," he began half-joking, "if I weren't busy pretending to be professional, I'd say your armor is impressive." She arched a brow. "Impressive enough to survive a skirmish with galactic mercenaries, yes. Not intended as adornment," he smirked. "Well, it's working anyway. Looks intimidating and stylish. 2 for 1. She allowed herself a fleeting grin, and he caught it, committing it to memory. For the first time, her walls felt a little less imposing. The moment was interrupted by a sudden alert. The gravjet's inertial dampeners showed minor fluctuations, threatening to destabilize the engine test. "Quickly," she said, her voice firm, "adjust the power modulation or we risk catastrophic feedback." They worked together, hands moving in synchronized precision, laughter and quips flowing even amidst the tension. He made a playful comment about her alien multitasking skills, and she shot back a deadpan remark about his human impatience. Yet the banter eased the pressure, making the impossible task feel almost enjoyable. After what felt like hours but was only a tense afternoon, the gravjet purred to life, its plasma core humming in perfect resonance. He leaned back, breathing heavily but smiling. "Well, that's a success. Drinks on me? Or are alien bosses allergic to human celebrations?" Her eyes flicked toward him, and he could have sworn she contemplated saying yes, then decided against it, a faint smile lingering. "I will consider it," she said, the words soft but deliberate. "Perhaps after further assessment of human tendencies." He laughed, leaning back against the console. "Fair enough, I'll take any small victory." The hangar settled into quiet once again, but he noticed that the air felt charged, the morning's work leaving an unspoken tension that neither machinery nor words could fully dissipate. And as she moved toward the exit, he realized that every glance, every touch, and every shared laugh had shifted something between them. A silent acknowledgement that this partnership, unpredictable and electric, was far from ordinary. For the first time, he didn't mind the long hours, the complex systems, or the daunting expectations. All he could focus on was the way she watched him, the small cracks of amusement she allowed, and the thrilling uncertainty of what would happen the next time she crossed his path. The day began with a quiet hum of graviton engines and the faint smell of ionized metal lingering in the hangar. He was already at the console, checking diagnostic readings, when she appeared without the usual warning. Her footsteps echoed softly on the alloy floor, a rhythm that seemed to synchronize with his own heartbeat. She didn't speak at first, just observed him with those piercing amber eyes, the long sweep of her ears angled slightly forward in a way that made him wonder if they were listening for more than just machinery. "Still alive," she finally said, her voice cool but carrying a hint of amusement. "Remarkable for a human." He glanced up, smirking. "Barely," he replied, gesturing to the monitors. "Though I must say, working with a galactic warrior as my motivator keeps the adrenaline levels stimulating." Her eyebrow quirked, and for a moment he imagined a flash of a smile beneath the composure she so carefully maintained. "Stimulating?" she repeated, clearly calculating whether the term fit her protocol for professional interactions. "I hope you are not implying something inappropriate." He leaned back in his chair, feigning innocence, merely noting that proximity to highly skilled alien officers tends to improve focus. Purely observational. She let out a soft, incredulous sigh and moved toward the gravjet they had been preparing the previous day. Her hands hovered over the engine's plasma conduits, adjusting settings with precision that made him wonder if he'd been in a hangar with a human at all, or some sort of galactic myth come to life. "You missed a calibration," he said, stepping closer. "These readings are slightly off by 0.03 gravimetric units. If we proceed without adjustment, we could end up with unexpected propulsion vectors." Her head tilted slightly, a subtle gesture that made her long ears flick in thought. "You are thorough," she said, "for a human." He grinned. "It's my charm. I have other qualities too, but most require a more intimate demonstration." She froze, her hand still hovering over the conduits, and for a heartbeat, he thought he had crossed a line. But then she tilted her head further, eyes narrowing slightly, as though evaluating whether to allow his audacity. "Do not mistake amusement for permission," she said finally, her tone teasing but firm. He chuckled, adjusting the conduits quickly, knowing full well she had caught his intention. "Noted. Professionalism first, flirting second. That's my human code." Their banter was interrupted by a sudden alarm. An auxiliary energy node was overheating, sparks flying in tiny arcs. Without thinking, he lunged forward, catching the sparking wire before it could ignite the nearby plasma coil. She was instantly at his side, one hand on his shoulder, steadying him as he worked. "You are reckless," she said, eyes scanning the readings. "A human touch can be dangerously unpredictable." "And you're dangerously close for comfort," he replied, ducking under her arm as they rerouted the energy. "Though I suppose that's part of our new workflow, isn't it?" She didn't answer, instead guiding his hands over the intricate network of conduits with meticulous care. Each contact sent a faint tingle through him, and he caught himself wondering if the faintest friction against skin could ever be dangerous in its own way. Hours passed with this delicate balance of proximity and protocol, each task blending technical precision with subtle interplay. He found himself intentionally offering jokes disguised as status reports, and she responded with deadpan humor, lightly mocking his human impatience while allowing herself fleeting smiles. By late afternoon, the gravjet hummed in harmonious resonance, its plasma core stabilized and inertial dampeners operating within optimal tolerances. He wiped a smear of oil from his forehead, glancing at her. "Well, I'd say we did it. Not bad for a human and a alien empress." She arched a brow. "Not bad," she echoed, the smallest hint of approval in her tone. I expected more competence, though you are improving. Improving? I'm practically a prototype for human excellence, he said with mock pride, and she let out a sound almost like laughter, though far too subtle to be audible to anyone else in the hangar. The moment was interrupted by the sudden need to recalibrate a secondary thruster, and they both leaned over the console in synchronized effort, hands brushing repeatedly, each touch carrying a quiet, electric charge that neither could deny. Finally, as the system stabilized and the hum of the gravjet settled into a soothing rhythm, he leaned back against the console, meeting her gaze. So, what now? Do we test flight it, or do I get a performance review from the galaxy's deadliest boss? Her long ears twitched slightly, and she allowed herself a faint, approving nod. We test, but know this. Your recklessness has not gone unnoticed. He smiled, taking the remark as a challenge. Good. I prefer to keep life interesting. As she moved to inspect the cockpit, the afternoon sun casting long beams across the hangar, he realized that every shared glance, every touch during the repairs, and every teasing word had shifted something unspoken between them. The professional distance that had seemed insurmountable yesterday now felt permeable, a line they were both testing in their own ways. And for the first time, he didn't mind the weight of her scrutiny or the pressure of the task. The gravjet might have been the project, but the thrill of this electric, unpredictable connection between human daring and alien command was becoming the most compelling work he had ever undertaken. The hangar was quiet except for the faint, rhythmic thrum of the gravjet's engines cooling, a sound that seemed to vibrate in tandem with the low hum of the facility itself. He leaned against the console, hands crossed, trying to appear casual, though he was acutely aware of her presence. She stood a few paces away, examining the ship's hull with the same meticulous attention she had shown earlier. Long ears angled as if they could hear the very molecules of the metal shifting under the thermal stress. You're staring, she said without turning, and he realized she had sensed it without needing to look. There was no accusation in her tone, just an observation wrapped in that subtle, authoritative cadence that made him simultaneously nervous and intrigued. I was, admiring your technique, he said quickly, waving a hand vaguely toward the hull. Precision is important in gravjet maintenance, after all. She turned then, a single eyebrow arched, eyes glinting with a mixture of amusement and challenge. Your attempts at flattery are predictable, she said, though the corners of her mouth twitched, betraying the faintest hint of a smile. He grinned, encouraged by the tiny break in her stoic demeanor. Predictability has its advantages. You always know what to expect, like a human survival manual. Her head tilted slightly, ears twitching, a gesture that struck him as almost feline in elegance. You are bold for a human. Most would not dare such irreverence. He shrugged, stepping closer under the pretense of checking a sensor panel. Boldness is part of the charm package. Warning, it comes with a risk of sparks, both electrical and interpersonal. She didn't respond immediately, instead bending to inspect the gravjet's fuselage, the sun catching in her hair and casting an ethereal glow over her features. He noticed how her eyes flicked over every joint, every panel seam, every conduit with the kind of focus that could make a human engineer feel both inferior and inspired simultaneously. You know, she said finally, straightening and fixing him with a measured gaze, I expected you to fumble the diagnostics. Yet you adapted quickly. He smirked. Adaptation is my specialty. Humans have a certain flair for improvisation, even when facing an alien empress who might vaporize us for stepping out of line. Her lips twitched again, almost imperceptibly, and she shook her head. You have a remarkable capacity for underestimating consequences. I prefer to think of it as human ingenuity, he replied, adjusting a loose panel with a flourish that was far more for show than necessity. And sometimes a dash of reckless charm. The quiet was broken by a sudden alert, a flare of energy on the auxiliary power grid. Both of them snapped into action, moving in tandem as if rehearsed for months. Hands brushed against each other repeatedly, fleeting contacts that sent a current of tension and electricity mingling with the static from the malfunctioning conduit. "Careful," she muttered, her voice tight as she guided his hands over the circuit. "One wrong adjustment, and we risk destabilizing the reactor node." "And one right adjustment," he said, grinning despite the sparks dancing at their fingertips, "and we get to see just how powerful a cold, intimidating alien empress can be in person." Her ears twitched sharply, a signal that made him wonder if she was scolding him or secretly entertained. "You are incorrigible," she said, though her tone held no real reproach. Working together, they managed to stabilize the node, the energy field settling into a calm resonance. He stepped back, breathing hard, noticing that she didn't move immediately either. Their eyes met across the glow of the machinery, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. "You handle pressure well," she said finally, her voice lower, softer. "Most humans would panic under these conditions." "Training," he replied with a wink, "and a lot of caffeine. Maybe a little luck." A faint smile ghosted across her lips, fleeting yet genuine. He caught it, and the moment stretched, both of them suspended in the quiet aftermath of chaos. The unspoken tension that had been building for days, flirtation, curiosity, cautious respect, was suddenly palpable, heavier than any mechanical load they had ever calculated. "I suppose," she said, stepping closer, "there is value in human adaptability." "And I suppose," he said, heart racing, "there's value in alien guidance, even when it comes with stern warnings and long ears that twitch at every misstep." She let out a soft, almost inaudible sound, a mixture of amusement and resignation, and for a second, he imagined the entire galaxy could wait, that nothing outside this hangar mattered except the subtle, electric interplay between them. The sun dipped lower, casting elongated shadows across the hangar floor, and he realized that this partnership, this dance of professionalism, humor, and unspoken attraction, was evolving into something neither of them had anticipated. And despite the risks, he felt a thrill unlike any other, the possibility of connection, of trust, of navigating an unpredictable future, together with someone as formidable and intriguing as the alien empress herself. And in that quiet, charged moment, as sparks of energy died down and the gravjet stood silently restored, he knew the next 6 minutes, or 6 hours, or 6 days would be anything but ordinary. The hangar lights flickered as if indecisive, casting long, wavering shadows across the rows of gravjets and maintenance platforms. He worked in silence, hands deftly tightening conduits and calibrating the delicate flux regulators, all the while feeling the weight of her presence behind him. The alien empress moved with a fluid grace, her long ears twitching with every subtle sound, eyes scanning schematics and panels as if memorizing the entire facility in a single sweep. He imagined she could probably sense the exact temperature of each metal surface, the faintest vibration in the alloy beams, and maybe even the subtle nervousness in his pulse. "You've been avoiding my question," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the hum of machinery. She leaned against a console, crossing her arms in a pose that seemed effortless but commanded attention. "About the diplomatic simulations." He froze mid-twist, conduit half secured, and gave her a sheepish grin. "Avoiding? No, I was, strategically procrastinating to gain perspective." Her lips twitched in the barest hint of a smile, but her eyes didn't soften. "You do realize that perspective is not an adequate substitute for preparation, yes?" He laughed a little too loudly. "Perspective is everything. You can't master interstellar negotiations without seeing the big picture. And besides, I find your presence enlightening." A faint flicker of amusement crossed her features, though she didn't comment further. Instead, she moved to a nearby panel and began tapping commands, the holographic display flaring into life with a cascade of lights and data streams. He followed her movement with a glance, noticing how her long ears angled slightly forward, signaling intense concentration. She was beautiful, yes, but not in a human sense. More like a force of nature that could dismantle any pretense, human or otherwise. "Careful with that sequence," he said, leaning over her shoulder. "A single misalignment could trigger a feedback loop in the flux regulator, And that, my esteemed Empress, might result in a spectacular, though highly entertaining, disaster. She raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. Highly entertaining, you say? I do not encourage entertainment at the cost of protocol. He smirked. Ah, but sometimes entertainment is the only way to discover weaknesses in an otherwise flawless system. Or, keep morale up in the hangar. She turned to face him fully this time, hands on her hips, and he couldn't help noticing the subtle tension in her stance. You speak as though my standards are a challenge to overcome. They are not. They are expectations, non-negotiable. Expectations, he said thoughtfully, tapping a finger to his chin, are simply guidelines that require a healthy dose of creative interpretation. He winked, instantly regretting it, when her ears twitched sharply in what he assumed was disapproval. A brief alarm sounded from the gravjet he had been repairing, causing both of them to spring into coordinated motion. He adjusted a stabilizer while she rerouted the power matrix, hands occasionally brushing in a fleeting contact that sent an unspoken charge through the air. They moved with an unspoken rhythm, a combination of skill, timing, and intuition, each anticipating the other's next move. Your methods are unorthodox, she murmured as they worked side by side, eyes not leaving the machinery. And your methods are terrifyingly precise, he replied, leaning close enough to risk a spark from a live conduit. Together, though, we make a pretty impressive team. She didn't respond immediately, but her eyes flicked to his face for the briefest moment, the corner of her mouth betraying a ghost of a smile. Do not mistake cooperation for sentimentality. I wouldn't dream of it, he said, chuckling softly. But it's nice to feel like maybe, just maybe, I'm not completely doomed in your presence. Her gaze softened imperceptibly, just enough to make him question whether he had imagined it. Then she stepped back, crossing the hangar floor with a fluid, almost predatory grace, and began checking readings at another console. The tension between them didn't dissipate. It evolved into a quiet, electric anticipation that thrummed through the air, mingling with the scent of ozone and hot metal. You are unusually resilient for a human, she said after a moment, her tone neutral but layered with curiosity. Most would have cracked under the pressure by now. He shrugged, wiping a streak of grease from his cheek. Resilience is part instinct, part stubbornness, and part knowing when to flirt with danger, and occasionally superiors with long ears and impeccable taste in machinery. Her ears twitched sharply this time, though he couldn't tell if it was irritation, amusement, or something else entirely. Flippancy does not protect you from consequences, she said, moving closer again. But it is interesting. He caught that single word, felt it linger in the charged space between them, and realized that their dance, half professional, half playful, wholly unpredictable, was far from over. There was trust building, unspoken challenges being issued, and a subtle acknowledgement of attraction neither could afford to name aloud yet. The hangar was silent again, the gravjets humming steadily, as if they too recognized the fragile equilibrium that had settled over the two of them. He glanced at her, saw the faintest curve in her expression, and knew that the next move, whether human, alien, or both, would change everything. And somewhere beneath all the circuits, sparks, and protocols, he felt it. The thrilling, terrifying possibility of connection, the delicate balance of power, trust, and desire, waiting to be tested in the hours and missions to come. The hangar smelled faintly of ozone and scorched metal, a comforting mix that had become oddly familiar over the past weeks. He moved among the gravjets, checking each one with methodical precision, though his mind kept drifting to her presence, her quiet dominance, the subtle power that had grown from intimidating authority to something less easily defined. She was at the far end of the hangar, seated atop a maintenance platform, with her long ears angled forward, watching him with an expression that was equal parts curiosity and amusement. The final mission had been a whirlwind of energy discharges, strategic maneuvers, and unexpected encounters. And somehow they had survived it all, together. You seem calmer than usual, she said, her voice carrying easily across the distance. He smiled, tightening a flux conduit and stepping back to admire the alignment. I've learned a few things, like how to survive explosions, how to repair alien tech without blowing myself up, and most importantly, how not to panic when someone with long ears and laser focus is staring at me. Her eyes flicked toward him, a rare softness behind their usual intensity. You have grown, yes, more resilient, more adaptable, and perhaps more clever than I expected. He chuckled, feeling the tension of the past weeks dissolve into something lighter. Clever? I prefer surprisingly competent under pressure. He made a show of wiping his hands on a rag, though his attention kept darting to her. She tilted her head, considering him with a mixture of appraisal and amusement. You have earned a degree of trust. Not complete, of course. You are still human, but it is significant. Significant enough that I can finally admit, he said, walking closer, that I enjoy working with you, even when you scare me half to death. Her ears twitched, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but he thought he saw the ghost of a smile tug at her lips. Perhaps the feeling is mutual, she said, although I would never admit it in formal report. He laughed softly, stepping closer until they were only a few feet apart. The hangar lights reflected off the metallic surfaces of the gravjets, casting long shadows that danced around them. You know, I've realized something important during all of this. And what would that be? She asked, her tone even, but her gaze sharpening. That trust, even the tiniest bit, is worth more than all the protocols, the manuals, and the warning lights in the galaxy. And maybe, just maybe, some bonds are worth risking a little protocol for. She studied him for a long moment, then pushed herself off the platform with a fluid motion, landing silently on the ground. She circled him slowly, the long ears alert, the eyes taking in his every movement. You speak boldly for someone so fragile, she murmured, the corners of her mouth hinting at a smirk. Yet you have proved your worth beyond what I anticipated. He smiled, feeling the weight of her approval and the subtle electricity in the air. I learned from the best, he said, nodding toward her, and maybe taught you a thing or two about improvisation. A brief laugh escaped her, melodic and unexpected. Improvisation, a dangerous human trait, yet effective. The hum of the gravjet seemed to pause in reverence as she extended a hand toward him. I suppose, there are worse ways to begin mutual understanding? He took her hand carefully, feeling the warmth and strength beneath her alien skin. Agreed, he said softly, and there's a lot more to learn, I think. Her long ears twitched, and she nodded. Yes, much remains, untested. Perhaps we shall explore it together. They stood in the hangar, surrounded by machines that hummed quietly, aware of every bolt, every conduit, and every whispered secret of the past weeks. The danger they had faced together, the trust they had built, and the unspoken connection between them formed a fragile, yet undeniable bridge, one that spanned the gulf between species, protocol, and expectation. I never thought a human could handle this, she admitted, her voice almost a whisper. Yet you have exceeded all expectations. And you, he said, looking up into her sharp, intelligent gaze, have shown me that even the strongest can have moments of vulnerability. And that's not so bad. She inclined her head slightly, considering his words. Not bad at all. Perhaps even advantageous. The tension that had defined their interactions for so long dissolved into a quiet companionship, a shared understanding that was neither rushed nor forced. The hangar was still alive with lights and machines, yet for the first time, he felt truly at peace within it, and within the presence of someone who had once been an imposing, untouchable figure, now transformed into a partner in unexpected discovery. He breathed in, feeling a sense of closure not only in the task completed, but in the journey they had shared. The galaxy outside might remain vast, unpredictable, and perilous, but inside the hangar, between human and alien, trust had been forged, respect established, and a subtle bond sealed, a bond that would guide them forward through missions, dangers, and the unpredictable tides of interstellar life. With one last glance at the rows of gravjets, he turned to her and said softly, Ready for whatever comes next? Her long ears twitched in acknowledgement, a small smile gracing her lips. Always. With you. And in that moment, the human and the alien warrior stood side by side, not just as allies, but as partners in a story that had reshaped both of their lives. Proof that connection, courage, and a touch of humor could transcend species, expectations, and the cold expanse of space.